From streets to salvation, a stranger's kindness changed my life. Let me take you back to a moment in my life when I had nothing. No home, no direction, no hope. My name is Claire, and I'm 29 years old. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, in a modest house with parents who worked hard to make ends meet. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and for a long time, that was enough. But life has a way of taking unexpected turns, doesn't it? A series of bad choices, a string of losses, and before I knew it, I was standing on a street corner in Chicago, clutching everything I owned in a tattered backpack. I was homeless, alone, invisible to the world. It's hard to describe what that feels like, the weight of people's indifference, the sting of their avoidance. You become a ghost, drifting through a city that never notices you. I spent my days walking endlessly, trying to stay warm, trying to stay alive. Nights were the worst. The cold seeped into my bones, and fear was a constant companion. I'd find shelter under bridges or in the shadows of abandoned buildings, hoping no one would find me. One particular night, I was sitting on a bench in a park, clutching my backpack and staring at the ground. My stomach growled, but I didn't care. Hunger had become a constant companion, one I had learned to ignore. The only thing I wanted was to disappear, to stop existing. That's when I heard a voice, soft yet firm. "Hey, are you okay?" I looked up, startled. A man stood before me, his hands tucked into the pockets of a worn leather jacket. He wasn't intimidating, but I didn't trust anyone. "I'm fine," I muttered, averting my gaze. He didn't leave. Instead, he sat down on the bench, leaving a respectful distance between us. "It's freezing out here," he said, glancing at me. "You've been sitting here for hours. Do you have somewhere to go?" The question stung. Somewhere to go? If only. "I'm fine," I repeated, my voice sharper this time. I wanted him to leave, to stop reminding me of everything I didn't have. But he didn't leave. He just sat there quietly, like he was waiting for me to speak. After a long silence, he said, "I'm Paul, by the way." I didn't respond. I didn't want to tell him my name. Names felt too personal, too vulnerable. But Paul didn't push. He just sat there, his presence oddly comforting, even though I didn't want it to be. The next day, I saw him again. I was sitting on the same bench, because where else could I go? Paul approached me with a cup of coffee and a sandwich. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, placing them on the bench beside me. I didn't thank him. I didn't even look at him. But when he walked away, I grabbed the sandwich and devoured it like it was the best meal I'd ever had. And maybe it was. For the next few days, Paul kept showing up. Sometimes he'd bring food, sometimes just a smile and a hello. He never asked for anything in return, never pressured me to talk. He was just there. And slowly, against my better judgment, I started to let my guard down. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I finally spoke. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Paul looked at me, his expression kind but serious. "Because I've been where you are," he said simply. "And someone once did the same for me." That was the moment everything changed. Paul didn't see me as a lost cause. He didn't pity me or judge me. He saw me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt human again. Over the weeks that followed, Paul told me his story. How he had hit rock bottom after losing his job and his family. How he had ended up on the streets, just like me. And how a stranger's kindness had helped him turn his life around. "It's a cycle," he said. "Kindness keeps going, as long as we pass it on." Paul helped me in ways I never expected. He found a shelter for me to stay in, where I could sleep safely and start rebuilding my life. He connected me with resources, job training programs, counseling, and even a small community of people who had been through similar struggles. At first, I was hesitant. It felt too good to be true, like it would all disappear if I let myself believe in it. But Paul never wavered. He showed up every day, offering encouragement and reminding me that I was worth saving. By the end of that year, I had a part-time job at a diner and a small room in a shared apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. Paul and I stayed in touch. He became more than just the stranger who saved me. He became my friend, my mentor, and my reminder that no matter how far you've fallen, there's always a way back up. But the most important thing Paul taught me wasn't about survival or success. It was about kindness. the kind that expects nothing in return, the kind that changes lives. Paul's lessons in kindness stayed with me, and as I built my life back piece by piece, I realized just how rare and powerful his actions were. He didn't just save me from the streets, he gave me a purpose. A year after meeting Paul, I decided to give back in the same way he had given to me. On weekends, I started volunteering at the shelter where I had once stayed. At first, I cleaned, served meals, and helped organize donations. But as time went on, I began talking to the people there. People who, like me, had lost their way but still held on to a sliver of hope. I met so many individuals with stories that broke my heart and inspired me at the same time. There was Sarah, a single mother of two, who had fled an abusive relationship and was trying to start over. There was Marcus, a veteran battling PTSD who had lost everything but still dreamed of opening his own business. And then there was Elena, a young girl, no older than 18, who reminded me of myself, lost, scared, and unsure if anyone in the world cared. When I spoke to them, I saw my own journey reflected back. I realized that while the pain and struggle were unique to each person, the need for kindness and connection was universal. Every small gesture, a warm meal, a kind word, or even just listening could mean the difference between despair and hope. Paul and I remained close during this time. He was proud of the work I was doing, but every time I thanked him for saving my life, he would shake his head and say, "You saved yourself, Claire. I just reminded you that you could." One day, Paul asked me to meet him at the same park bench where we'd first met. When I arrived, he was holding a small, worn notebook. "I want you to have this," he said, handing it to me. Inside were pages filled with his thoughts, lessons, and experiences from his time on the streets. It was raw, honest, and deeply moving. "This is how I stayed grounded," he explained. "It helped me remember who I was, even when I felt lost. Maybe it'll help you too." I couldn't hold back my tears. Paul's gesture was more than a gift. It was a reminder of the bond we shared, one that had been forged through pain and healing. I promised him I would keep the notebook close and use it to help others the way he had helped me. Over the next few years, my life blossomed in ways I never imagined. I found a full-time job as a counselor for a nonprofit organization that worked with the homeless. I continued to volunteer at shelters and even started my own outreach program to provide food and supplies to those living on the streets. Through it all, I carried Paul's notebook with me, using his words as a guide and inspiration. I often thought about how different my life could have been if he hadn't stopped to ask me, "Are you okay?" A simple question that changed everything. But life has a way of throwing unexpected curveballs. One day, I received a call from a mutual friend who told me that Paul had fallen ill. He was in the hospital, and the prognosis wasn't good. My heart sank. Paul, the man who had been my rock, was now the one who needed help. I visited him as often as I could, bringing him meals, sitting by his bedside, and reading to him from his own notebook. Despite his illness, Paul remained the same kind, optimistic person he'd always been. "You've done more than I ever could have dreamed, Claire," he told me one evening, his voice weak but full of pride. "You're my legacy." Paul passed away peacefully a few weeks later, surrounded by friends and loved ones. At his memorial, I shared the story of how he had saved my life and inspired me to keep his kindness alive. There wasn't a dry eye in the room as I spoke of the man who had turned a stranger's life around with nothing more than compassion and a belief in second chances. Today, I continue to honor Paul's memory by spreading the kindness he showed me. The outreach program we started together has grown into a full-fledged organization that helps hundreds of people every year. And every time I meet someone who feels invisible, I think of Paul and his unwavering belief in the power of human connection. His notebook still sits on my desk, its pages filled with wisdom and love. Whenever I feel overwhelmed or unsure, I open it and find the strength to keep going. Paul's words remind me that no matter how dark life may seem, there's always light to be found. And sometimes that light comes from a simple act of kindness. If this story has moved you, if it's reminded you of the power of compassion and second chances, I invite you to join me in continuing Paul's legacy. Let's be the light in someone's darkness. Let's ask the simple questions, offer the small gestures, and remind people that they're not alone. Please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. Together, we can keep spreading the kindness that changes lives, one act at a time. Thank you for listening, and remember, kindness is a cycle. Let's keep it going.